on the red stage with the third presenter of today, who will be no one else than Michael Carducci from IHS Markit, who will speak about ego-driven development. Michael Carducci is a hands-on software architect, consultant, entrepreneur, entertainer, and speaker with a reputation for doing the impossible. Over the past 2 decades, he has gained experience and insights from a variety of roles spanning the full project lifecycle and numerous technologies. In addition to his experience in the technology industry, Michael has earned equal recognition and renown as an award-winning professional magician and mentalist. I'm getting really curious about that. This pursuit has earned him a unique perspective on problem-solving, human psychology, I've seen the card, and communication. In the before times, when not on the road speaking, coding, or performing, Michael could be found exploring the mountains of Colorado. I've been in the Rockies, it's really great in Denver. On 2 wheels, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, or deep underwater exploring shipwrecks and reefs. These days, it's mainly just a lot of Netflix. There are a few series about that. Ego-driven development is a humorous and brutally honest look at his career spanning over 2 decades. So he will dive into the war stories, train wrecks, and so many misguided attempts at greatness. So please welcome on stage with a huge virtual applause our next presenter, Michael Carducci with Ego-driven development. Michael, the stage is yours.
Afternoon or even good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Yes, my name is Michael Carducci, and we are talking about ego-driven development, a topic that I feel uniquely qualified to talk about. And by the way, just a heads up, as an egoist, or at least a recovering egoist, I do like to talk a lot. So there is a not trivial probability that I'm going to go a couple minutes over into the Q&A time, but hopefully we can still get to where we need to go to. Anyway, the reason I'm here is I have always wanted to be great. I want to be a great developer. I want to be a great architect. I want to be a great magician. I want to be a great speaker. And I've been given an opportunity to come here and talk about pretty much anything that I might want to talk about. So I don't want to talk about a technology or a framework that's going to be obsolete in a couple of years. No, I want to talk about something that's going to change the world. And what I've observed in my 2+ decades of professional software development is there is a shortage of truly great developers. Wouldn't it be great if in the time span of a 30-minute talk here at CraftConf that we could distill the process to what it takes to be great down into these 30 minutes into a simple PowerPoint deck and disseminate this to the world, and maybe in the process I might figure it out myself. So to write this talk, I started with the obvious question: what does every developer need to know in order to be great? And like all good questions, there are no answers, just more questions. In fact, the question that came out of this naturally was, well, how do we define great? Now, I could try to answer this question myself, but modesty forbids me from answering such a direct question. Now, I could ask others, but the problem is, well, we're all great, right? And in fact, looking at myself, looking at my peers, virtually all of us at one point or another had that moment where it was finally coming together. Our code was compiling, our tests were passing on the very first build, and we're kind of, okay, all right, I'm getting the hang of this. And usually every time I've had that thought, I am immediately smote. Is that the past tense, past participle? Actually, I don't even know what the difference between past tense and past participle is. I'm just trying to sound fancy. But that's what I do as an egoist. Virtually, every time I've had that thought, the coding gods have smitten, no, definitely not smitten, smited me, and knocked my ego down a peg or several. And that's the problem, is that we all think we're great developers, just like we all tend to think that we're great drivers. 93% of us think that we're above average. I'm sorry, that's not how averages work. But the reason we come up with these things is because we only tend to compare ourselves to others when others do something that ticks us off, when they do something dumb. Like, I think I'm a great driver. I'm certainly better than that person that just cut across 3 lanes to make that exit, or was reading their phone at a stoplight to turn green. But it's different when I do it, right? When they do it, they're just incompetent. When I do it, well, there are mitigating circumstances. And that's the problem with comparing ourselves with others. But maybe it's a good place to start, because the reality is the definition of great is relative. I'm great compared to people who are no less than me and do worse than me. And we see this everywhere. In fact, I read this a while back that the definition of great is relative, just like the definition of rich is relative. They ask people of all sorts of income brackets, are you rich? And universally, people say, no. And it doesn't matter how much you make. People who make annual 7 and even 8-figure incomes often don't consider themselves to be rich. Usually it's a 3x multiple. And in fact, many years ago, when I was earning about 1/3 what I earn today, if you were to ask me, hey, do you think somebody earning 3 times your salary is rich? I'd say yes. But here I am today earning what I currently earn. And if you ask me if I'd rich, I'd be like, no, I get by. But no, somebody who's earning 3 times what I'm earning, they're rich. And so maybe I'm not great yet, but I think I'm pretty good. And kind of going off of this notion of relative greatness, maybe this is the answer. A great developer is somebody who knows more than I do. And I've dabbled with this particular definition a lot. In fact, it goes all the way back to the beginning for me. I learned to program in the 1980s on an Apple II computer. And in fact, this was my very first programming book. And after my first program looked something like this. And after a while, I had devoured all 67 pages of that innocuous looking folio right here, all the way to the chapter at the end on advanced topics like if statements and for loops. Yes. And after I'd written several programs that looked pretty much like this, I felt like I had reached the ceiling of what a developer could do. I turned to my neighbor, who was of a similar technically minded, one of my first mentors, in fact. And I asked him for advice, and he went through his garage and he found a bunch of old Byte magazines. And now the younger generations might not remember this, but growing up in the 1980s, Byte magazine was a source of all kinds of fascinating information for a budding geek like myself. When I got those, I devoured every single article. I marveled at the advertisements that were in there, like $2,200 for a 256K memory expansion card for just 256K more RAM. And then I got to the end. And at the end of every Byte magazine, there was a basic program that you could type into your computer, your Apple II or your Commodore or your Tandy or whatever it was that you had at that time. And as I turned the page, I was in awe, because up until this point, most of my programs that I ever wrote looked something like this. I turned the page and what I saw was amazing. What even is this? Poke 784, T, poke 789, S, poke 779, D. It goes on and on like this. And that's a single line of code. All of this was a mystery to me. But when I saw it, I was in awe of how incomprehensible this code was. And I strived, whatever, to engender that same feeling of awe in anyone who saw my code for years. And this directly led to me writing this incomprehensible SQL function. And you know what? I am perversely proud of this code right here. In fact, I've been talking about this for years now. I've been on many stages at many conferences, and to this day, nobody has ever been able to tell me what this code does. Now, if you're squinting at it right now, if you're zooming in and looking at it, I'm going to ask, please don't take a guess, because at this point, I want to I want to continue my unbroken streak of nobody knowing what it is. Obviously, it encodes something, right? That's the name of the function. It takes a decoded string, the function's name, encode, and then it returns it does some kind of encoding, but beyond that, it doesn't really matter. Now, when I finished this code, our policy at the company that I worked for at the time, we had to review the code. So I sent it around to not just to a couple developers to review. No, I sent it to the entire department. I sent it to 50 full-time SQL developers, not because I really wanted to review. I just wanted to show off. And the most senior, the most experienced, the longest tenured SQL developer in the organization looked at it, and he sent me his response. And I still remember exactly what he said. And I quote, "I am not smart enough to have come up with what you've come up with here, and I say that in all earnestness," end quote. I know that's exactly what he said, verbatim, because of course I still have that email. I printed it out. It's actually in my office with me right now, and this was like 15 years ago. And in fact, I've quoted this individual on in job interviews and things like that. And I was so proud. I did really well here because, like I said, nobody has ever been able to tell me what this code does. Now, this style of coding has a reputation at this former employer where I worked many, many years ago. It earned the nickname, the colloquialism, Carducci code. And folks that I know who still work there, for many years after I left, these examples were in the new hire articles in the wiki. They called it Carducci code, and Carducci code is actively discouraged. But this got me to where I wanted to be, because if a great developer is somebody who knows more than I do, then I must be a great developer if I know more than my peers. And what better way to demonstrate my superior intellect by writing incomprehensible code? And the problem is I can't even maintain this code, by the way. And I believed this for a period of years. And I know I'm not alone in this. In fact, the legendary Neil Ford once observed that developers are drawn to complexity like moths to a flame, frequently with the same result. And although that code was good, although that code was fast, although it scaled linearly, and it might do good in certain organizations, new hire test where they want you to write incomprehensible code or very, very efficient but not readable code, it was clever. I'll give you this. It was clever, but by many actual meaningful metrics, the code wasn't very good. Now, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. It's not that I was wrong about this. The code is clever, arguably not very good. So instead of this, now we're done. It's not a developer writes smart code. They write good code. Great developers write great code. Good developers write good code. Simple, boom, done. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. I joined a company many, many years ago in the early 2000s. And my first day, they asked me to familiarize myself with the code. I did all the new hire stuff, filled out the paperwork, got assigned a laptop, etc. And then they said, well, there you go. While you're getting up to speed, familiarize yourself with the code. And so I start scrolling through the files, and it was pretty definitely bad code. Now, before you say anything, yes, I know this is Visual Basic 6. Look, it was a long time ago. I was young. I needed the money. Look, don't judge me, right? But VB6, that was a common language 20 years ago. We're not going to relitigate that. It was a bygone era, and we'll judge it as such. But even VB6, a language with a terrible reputation that is right up there or maybe down there with some of the other derided languages out there, even in VB6, there was a spectrum of bad to good. And this was most definitely bad code. I will highlight some of the most egregious offenses in just this one little snippet. I mean, starting with this Hungarian notation, really? In my opinion, Hungarian notation is one of the three worst things that ever came out of Microsoft. And then we're modifying a by ref parameter in a function like this. This is like a rookie Visual Basic mistake. And now, although I imagine most of the folks here never spent much time writing old Visual Basic 6 pre.NET, any of it, let alone writing any post.NET Visual Basic either. But in the parlance of Visual Basic, when you pass a string to a function, by default, it gets passed as a reference, which means modifying it here is also going to modify it in the calling function. So these changes are bleeding across boundaries, and there's going to be all kinds of unintentional side effects. You don't do this. You either explicitly pass it by ref, or by val rather, or you don't modify it, you reassign it to a local variable and mess with it that way. But whatever. I mean, that's a rookie mistake, and okay. I'm sitting here already patting my back. I'm thinking, thank goodness these old timers have some young blood in the company. I'm going to show them how it's done. Patting myself on the back, shaking my head as I read every single line. And then over here, we've got select star from. I mean, come on, what are we, animals? And hello, white space. Like, I looked at this, and this was bad code. They said familiarize you with yourself with the code, and I did one better. I didn't just familiarize myself with the code. I fixed it. I transformed this ugly, bad code into good code. Look at this. And you know what? I realize some of you right now are on smaller displays. Some of you are watching this on mobile devices, and you might not be able to read this code on the screen that you've got right now. And that's okay. One, trust me, it's good. But two, you don't even need to read it to know that it's good. Just look at the beauty of the shape of this code. It was good. I'm not, I got rid of, I moved to Pascal casing for the function names, Camel casing for the variable names, got rid of the ugly Hungarian notation, cleaned it up, and I'm not modifying a parameter, so I don't need to pass it by val or by ref because I read the documentation. And I know that ADODB had a command type of AD command table where I just give it the table name and I get that record set back. I mean, look at this. It was good, it was clean, it was readable, and most importantly, is in the style that I like. And so, of course, before I checked it in, I tested it. Well, I mean, I compiled it. And we shipped it in an era where shipping it literally meant shipping it. Now, I will never forget launch day. Now, of course, my boss, they said, hey, let's get all hands in by 7 a.m. And I'm like, 7 a.m.? Come on. I'm a developer. I'm a firm believer. There should not be 2 7 o'clocks in a day. Plus, the schools don't even open till later. So I rolled in around 8:30-ish and sat down on my desk, and my phone immediately started ringing. And what a wild idea. Why would developers have phones on their desks anyway? It turns out we were a small company. They wanted us to answer the phones as well. Now, I resented that, but I'm a team player. I'll answer the phone. I use the script. And I pick up the phone, and I answer it. And I say, hi, thanks for calling. How may I help you? We got a little script on our desk. And I hear a voice on the other end. They're like, yeah, hi. I'm getting an error 800E2571. And they stopped right there. And I don't know why they stopped. It's an irritating thing that users do sometimes. They give you there's an actual error message there, but they give you the number like that's supposed to mean something to me. Usually when that happens, it means I should probably call it a day. But, I'm like, okay, E2571, okay, keep reading, please. Index out of range. So I'm all the empathy I can muster. I'm so sorry, for your inconvenience. I'm creating the bug ticket. And I'm like, well, we'll have, we got top engineers on this, and we'll have an update for you soon, definitely before the end of the day. And I placate my customer, and I go and hang up the phone. And as I go to hang up the phone, I see something that I have never seen before. Every single light on that phone was lit up. Turns out we had 20 lines. I had no idea. So I answered the second line. Hi, thank you for calling. Sorry to keep you waiting. That was in the script too. But whatever, I'm a team player. Sorry to keep you waiting. And I hear a voice on the other say, yeah, hi. We're getting an error 800E2571. What a coincidence. Index out of range? Huh. Okay, I'll add you to the ticket. I'll give you 3 guesses what the third call was about. I won't ask you to guess the 4 because I don't know. I stopped answering at 3. I spent the rest of the day in the bathroom and actually called in sick the next day. Yeah. Remember that whole by val, by ref thing and how the modified string was? Yeah, they knew about that. See, they were stripping the select star from back out from the string that they passed in. And mid is the Visual Basic substring function, and instra returns -1 when the string is not found. Now, -1 is not a valid start position for a substring function, and this throws an exception. And if you look at this, you'll notice a lot of things wrong with it, but one of the things that is conspicuously missing is any kind of error handling, not even the glorious on error resume next, which was an actual language feature in Visual Basic. Basically, you tell the compiler, it's Visual Basic. How bad could it be? Just you get exceptions, just keep going. It can't be that bad. Actual language feature, by the way. And yeah, they knew, and they got a patch out. I came in the third day, a little late, 9:30 ish. I used the side door that way Lumberg wouldn't see me, but my boss was waiting for me. The second I walked in the door, it's like he was standing there waiting for me. The second I walked in the door, he looks at me, makes eye contact, and says, "Michael, great to see you. Glad you're feeling better. Conference room in 5?" And so I arranged the knickknacks on my desk so I could leave with a minimum of disruption on my final exit from the premises. I went into the meeting room and I waited the longest 5 minutes of my life. And finally, my boss, Tim, joins me in the conference room and he says, in this way that only the Brits, it seems, can pull off. It was a mix of politeness and anger, charm and contempt. He sits down friendly on the end of the desk and looks at me and shakes his head. He says, "Michael, what the hell were you thinking, mate?" And there were reasons I did what I did, and it was well intended. And I for some reason, language failed me that day. I stuttered. I couldn't. The only utterance that I could eke out was a very meek, I fixed it. And he looked at me and shook his head. He says, "Now, Michael, I believe what we have here is one of our Anglo-American linguistic disagreements. Let me give you an example. We invented a game that you play with a ball and your feet. We call it football. Now you Yanks invented a game that you play with a ball and your hands, and you call that football. Here in England, the birthplace of the English language, to have fixed something requires it began in a non-functional state. There was some form of intervention, and now it's in a functional state. Now, I think you'll find in this particular instance, it began in a functional state, then you intervened, and it is now in a non-functional state. That, to me, is the opposite of fixing, and the opposite of fixing is broke. That's right, you broke it. And all I could utter was, no, I fixed it. Michael, we'll try this again. And we went back and forth before the final mic drop moment where my boss, Tim, said, "Well, perhaps, but I like the way that my broke code works better than the way your fixed code doesn't." And he left the room. I don't know how I didn't get fired. But I learned a valuable lesson. It's not good code, because good is subjective in these cases. Good is hard to measure. And, as luck would have it, I think I came close to getting fired that day, but I was not fired. I got put on a new task, one of those "go away, kid, you bother me" projects, where they give you something so narrow in scope and enough time that you're kind of out from being underfoot for a while. It's so narrow in scope, they thought, I couldn't possibly screw it up. And so what did I do in that situation? Did I learn from my lesson? Of course not. I did the only thing I could do in my youthful exuberance. I decided to double down on greatness. A great developer doesn't write good code. They write the fastest code. That was something you can measure. That was something meaningful. And that's what I decided to do. You see that go away kid, you bother me project? They gave me 6 weeks to optimize one method. And they thought, he can't possibly screw this up any more than he screwed this thing up. And they did not know me very well. So they told me to optimize it. I didn't optimize it just a little bit. No, I became guilty of what you might refer to as extreme optimization. Now I have to pause here for a moment. I love this photo so much. And as you may have gathered from my bio, I do like to jump out of perfectly good airplanes, although this is not me in the photo as much as I would like it to be. But unfortunately, all of my friends, they know me too well to ever lend me a laptop on a weekend. And now I've done a lot of things skydiving. I've got about 300 jumps under my belt. I've been in the sport for several years. I'm a licensed skydiver. And in fact, I've even done magic tricks in free fall. I think I did the world's first card trick in free fall. But they said optimize it, and I did. I took this as far as I could possibly take it. First thing I did was clean up the Visual Basic code. And I realized that it could still be faster. So I'm like, you know what? I still got 5 weeks to work on this. I'm going to make it faster still. And then I started rolling my own types. And I learned more and more about some of the lower level optimizations that you can do in Visual Basic. And it got to the point that I wrote my own string type. And this was just... I was just creating arrays of memory. I was treating strings the way you treat strings in languages like C. It was an array of bytes that I had kind of well defined. I was doing some memory management, and all my functions, I was just moving bytes of memory around using low-level system APIs to do that. And that was much, much faster. But I still had 3 or 4 weeks to work on this, and I thought, I wonder if I could make this go faster. I looked at the code and realized all I'm really doing is moving bytes of memory around. I could probably do this in assembly. You know, they say you can't write inline assembly in a Visual Basic app back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Lazy people say that. Turns out, if you got enough time on your hands and enough will, you can make it happen. One of the things I learned back in those days is the Visual Basic 6 compiler was the same compiler that Visual C++ used. And it meant that it accepts all the same command line arguments. So I built my VB6 project by hand on the command line, and I was able to compile it down to assembly. And as I started to look at this, I realized that it follows some pretty standard conventions. So I go in there and I realize all I have to do is observe the compiler declaration when it compiles it down to assembly. I can swap one module of compiled VB into a module that I wrote in W32 ASM, swap those files, compile it, link it, ship it. And that's what I did. And that code, I will tell you, might be some of the fastest code I ever wrote in my life. I mean, this stuff screamed, it soared like an eagle on angel dust. And of course, we do annual builds. We do one major release a year. And so, of course, I'm a team player, so I took care of the build since it was a largely manual process. Of course, I checked everything in, and then I did we shipped it. It was great. They were impressed. I redeemed myself, and then I did what anybody would do in this situation. I quit my job, and I left the country. I moved back to the United States. And I think I'd been gone from the company about 6 months, and I'd been in the U.S. for a few. And I got a phone call. I looked down at my phone that day. I'm walking around 16th Street Mall in beautiful Denver, Colorado, and saw the phone numbers +44. I'm like, that's England. Who would be calling me from England? And I answer the phone, and I hear a voice on the other end. Michael, how are you? How was the move? How are things stateside? I hope you're well. Enough of that. Quick question. That migration routine you wrote, where is it? See, I didn't need to write a VB6 because what I needed was my W32 ASM module. So my VB6 was just an empty stub. All I needed was the compiler declaration of the module name and the method names. And then I would just swap those out at compile time. Of course, I checked it into source control, but after I left, they did a source control migration. They moved off of the awful Visual Source Safe onto something equally awful from that era. And they did it the classic way of source control migration. Who cares about history? Just check everything in new. And of course, while we're doing that, let's clean up all the cruft that got checked in, all the compiler artifacts, and everything else. So off we go. They look for it. They completely deleted my code. And so when they were trying to run this and test this, nothing would happen because all that they had in their source tree was an empty stub. So I tried to explain, they couldn't find it. And once they realized what I'd actually done, because back in those days, code reviews weren't really a thing, my boss wanted some help. And of course, I just completed an international move, and those thrills cost money. And I could use a little freelance dollary dues. And so, of course, I say, I'm happy to help you out. And I used all the negotiation and communication tricks at my disposal, and I negotiated a fee of free and a schedule of now. And that's what we did. And it was actually a very learning moment for me. By the way, the one thing I do like about this program, this thing, is I do actually want to get a picture like this someday. And I can't wait to do it. If nothing else, not just for the bragging rights, but for the jokes. Writing a program in freefall, actually doing it in the 45-ish seconds that I have. Maybe I can brag I'm the fastest programmer, but really it's the jokes. Because of course, I'm probably not going to be able to hang on to the laptop while I deploy, and I'll watch it fall and just be grateful that there are only a couple houses down there as the G-force of my deploying parachute causes me to drop it. And as I land, all my developer friends are going to be on the ground. They're like, so did it work? Did it run? And I can say, it crashed. Yeah. What program did you write? Hello, world. Are you going to try it again? Well, it's in pieces. I'd probably have to defragment my hard drive first. Yeah, the jokes don't get any better. What was the best part of it? Oh, cloud deployments were a breeze. Yeah, the jokes write themselves. Anyway, it was a valuable lesson for me. And maybe this is where I started to figure some things out. A good programmer may know how to make these low-level optimizations, but a great programmer knows when to leave them well alone. And if I'm truly honest for a moment, and if I'm objective about my motives, I wanted to show off. I wanted to use a language that I felt was superior to my team's language. I thought Visual Basic 6 was a joke language, and maybe it is, but it's what my team used. And what I realized is that optimized VB6 would have delivered significantly more value than assembly language. But at the end of the day, I put my wants ahead of the needs of my team and my organization. So great developers write the fastest code? No. They use real languages. Does it compile or interpret? Does it do what you want? Then it's a real language. And we could do this all day. And in fact, over the last 20 plus years, I've collected so many stories about every single one of these. The developers who write all the code or know all the answers, the loudest, most articulate. They never release a bug. No, it worked on my machine. Worked the longest hours, the loudest, the least willing to compromise, the not invented here syndrome. And I've got so many stories of these misguided attempts at greatness because we tend to define greatness by individual result. And it just doesn't hold up in our space. And I think the reason that we so often fail to reach our true potential of greatness is because we focus inward. We focus on ourselves. But greatness is not something that can be measured, at least not in this context. Great can't be defined objectively. Great isn't the code that we write, it's the value that we produce. And sometimes we can create value by writing no code at all. Like if I look back at this, I can tell you this impenetrable function is actually a SQL URL encode function. Yeah, it's crazy efficient, but who cares? I was a SQL developer, so the golden hammer, right? my idea was if you wanted to do a URL encode, you should make a database call. The thing is, I didn't add any outward value. I only added inward value. I had stuff that I could show off. I had stuff that I could brag about. And right here, objectively, maybe I added some value. But changing something without writing tests and without taking ownership of everything around it, it's just ego. It's just me saying, oh, my style is better than your style. You should write code like I write code, in the immortal words of the nerdcore rapper Standard Out. And when I rewrote this method in optimized VB6 instead of assembly language, I created a whole lot more outward value. Inwardly, I can show off. Outwardly, I can create something valuable for the team, for the organization, or for the customer. Greatness cannot be found inwards. It can only be found outward. And this is what I've learned in my career. A great developer doesn't do those bullet points. They consistently bring value to the team, the organization, and ultimately the customer or the user. I mean, however, whatever term you want to use, although I think it's amusing that our industry, there are only two industries in the world that refer to their customers as users, and we're the other one. But the reality is, what does it mean to create value? If you're solving the problems of the business and the customer, then you're creating value. And this is perhaps the most important lesson that I've learned in my career, this ability to think outwardly, to cultivate empathy. And these skills will last longer than any technology I'm going to learn in my career, any language, any framework, anything like that. Frameworks come and go. Languages come and go. Creating value is the constant. That is the skill that I look for when I hire today and that I try to model in my team. Creating value is the constant. And to quote Matt Stein, when you're able to create business value, you will be in demand. And I want to be clear, this isn't easy. Over 2 decades into my career, and I still have to remind myself to check my ego, check my expectations, check my agenda at the door. And my peers and my direct reports, they still call me on this type of thing from time to time. They hold me accountable and I hold them accountable. Ego won't get us there. Being great, it's a journey. It's not a destination. And at this point, I've realized maybe I'm never going to be great. And that's okay, because I can always be better. And at that, I know this is it's been an incredible honor to kind of be part of this community and just see the lessons being taught and the wisdom being shared at this conference. And I can only wish that I had this 20 plus years ago. And I'm so grateful to be invited to be part of this community. So with that, I know we're a couple minutes over, but I do want to thank everybody for your time and attention. And I think we are open for questions.
Yes, we are open for questions. Thanks a lot for this really inspiring message at the end. And we have one question right now, and I would like to encourage everyone who wish to shoot some questions. We have kind of 8 minutes for questions, so we can go for them. The first question is from Joel, and it is, what was your biggest mistake that you were able to solve with a method that you can still laugh about?
That's a biggest mistake. That's a hard one to quantify. When I look at some of these, when I look at some of these things, I realize that most of the mistakes I made tend to rank somewhere in the middle. Biggest mistake. Oh, wow. Biggest mistake I think that I ever made. I was working for a company. We're in the financial data space, and the team I worked on was responsible for stock alerts, or security alerts. So if you want to know when the price of a share of Apple goes up by 5%, or if your portfolio has crossed the 52-week moving average, so we did these real-time financial alerts, and there was a whole suite of them. And we just signed a large customer, and the mistake that I made was I assumed that all of the data that we were bringing in from their system into our system as they migrated over to our platform was that the alerts that they gave us were all valid. And of course, as part of the migration, I brought everything in and disabled all these alerts. And then when we went live, I just toggled them all on. And it turns out 2/3 of them came in a disabled state. Some of them had been disabled for years. And when I went in, I turned them all on. And in fact, we sent out a couple million text messages to people who probably didn't want them. And that led to a short-lived but rather intimidating class action lawsuit that my company got. But I was able to go in there and do some cleverness to work within the confines of the legacy system that we had, and have a more nuanced way to have different reasons to toggle alerts on and off. But that was, I can still look back at that and feel pretty good about it. But I still laugh at that mistake that I made. I didn't laugh then. I was pretty terrified when I found out I caused a 9-figure class action lawsuit to get filed against my company, which did get dismissed. But I was proud of the result, and I still do laugh at that.
That's really great. Thank you very much for your answer. The next question is from Christoph. What's your secret ultimate recruitment question indicating a real greatness level of a candidate?
That's a really great question. One of my favorite questions there, and I actually took this from Brian Sletton, who I believe is also speaking this week here at Craft Conference. I really like this. I just asked the question, kind of similar to the previous one, what's the worst bug you ever wrote? Because that tells you so much about a person, like how seriously they take themselves, how honest they can be, and what they've learned. If somebody says, "Oh, I never really write serious bugs," I'm just like, I mean, maybe that's true, but that's one of my go-to questions right there. Is I want to, what I really want to do is I want to see how people think and approach questions. And sometimes I get in. I also like to kind of tease out some of the soft skill things. So I talk about potential conflicts and things like that. But my one go-to question is that. And the other thing that I like to do is, when we do some kind of like pair coding exercise, I'm going to throw some things in there that I want to see how they deal with the bugs and some of the legacy code and stuff like that, and how they approach a lot of this stuff. So these are great questions, by the way, and usually I get so few questions on this topic. So I'm glad. I want to thank everybody for participating. But what else do we have? I think we've got like 4 minutes, if I'm correct.
Actually, I have one more question from Istvan. While writing the assembly piece instead of the VB6 code, did you have a little voice in your head that you ignored asking you to stop? Or at the time it seemed like the best thing to do?
At the time it seemed like the best thing to do. But the reason was that was driven entirely by ego. One of the things that really drove that, it wasn't just make it faster still. Can I shave another nanosecond off of this or whatever? It was being a VB6 developer when all my friends were like Java developers working with real languages. Of course, this was early Java. This is like Struts 1 days. And, but they always would laugh at me and they'd say, "Hey, Mike, how's that Visual Basic job you've got? That's okay. One day you'll take the training wheels off. You'll get there." And I just wanted to have that moment. I mean, this was all I could think about. I wanted to have that moment where the next time they made that little snarky remark, I could be like, "Well, actually, my last project, I was writing assembly. Can you hang with that? Huh? I didn't think so. Of course, I never got to have that conversation anywhere outside of the shower. So it was only ever a conversation that took place in my head. But that was where my head was at. These experiences did make me better when I was able to kind of objectively ask the question, like, what the hell is wrong with me? And what was I thinking? It wasn't when my boss was asking me, what the hell were you thinking? My thought was I was justified. But through the lens of time and experience, I look at this a lot differently, and I think it's really kind of shaped some of my thinking today as an architect.